Hey, long time no see, YouTube, I know. I've decided to re-upload and redo certain parts of this video after YouTube put a copyright claim on my WWE joke, which is why I have the short reel of it. But with a lot more of you guys here now, and with Black Panther Wakanda Forever coming out soon, I figured I'd re-upload this since it was my first official movie review. The audio for this was recorded before Chadwick Boseman's death, so a lot of it is going to sound dated. And before we get into it, I just wanted to say thank you guys for 6,000 plus subs, and I'm sorry to go AWOL on y'all after the promise of more videos. With this, I hope to start uploading more consistently. With that all out of the way, I present to y'all the Black Panther Retrospective Redo. Enjoy. Back during a time where the world had something to look forward to besides what other disaster 2020 has in store for us, there was a massive hype train for Marvel's Black Panther. A film that represented the pinnacle of black excellence in superhero form. The hype for this movie was astronomical for so many reasons. It released during the prime of the MCU, it preceded Avengers Infinity War, it was a spin-off with a character introduced in Captain America Civil War, and the obvious one, it was blackity black black. And I'm black, y'all! This movie was making history before it was even in theaters for being a major blockbuster superhero flick featuring majority black cast. By the time it finished its theater run, it made over $1.35 billion worldwide, which would be huge for any movie, but Marvel at this point in time could fart out billion-dollar films like it was nothing. Hell, Disney in general has been farting these out for years anyway, but I digress. What makes Black Panther so special in this regard then? That's what I want to discuss in this video. However, I think it's imperative that I talk a little bit more about my experience with this film and my prior experience to watching what I did, because in hindsight, this film shaped a lot of my experiences in college, and I honestly just have a huge appreciation for this character. Plus, my theater going experience was pretty epic. As a huge fan of superheroes and a young blurred with way too much time to play video games, the very first time I saw this character in anything was Marvel's Ultimate Alliance. This game was my gateway into the Marvel Universe before it was popular, and it probably was for others too. I seriously thought Iron Man was a robot before playing this. As I grew older and consumed more superhero media, growing into even bigger nerd, I became more familiar with these characters through various TV shows, animated movies, live action movies, and the occasional Google search and comic read because I had no idea where to even start reading these stories. And I still don't. Black Panther appeared here and there, but I never really saw him in anything that left a lasting impression on me due to his lack of presence, or I probably forgot how most of the story went since I was just a kid for a lot of these movies and stuff, and saw plenty of them in the first place. That all changed when this gem of a TV show released in 2010, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
I call. Ben?
Booyah! Full house! 4 aces.
Seriously, this show was so damn good. If you don't have anything to watch but have Disney Plus, watch this show. That's my plug for this video. This was the show that made me a fan of this character.
I am not the same man as my father, M'Baku, for my rage is greater.
Whenever I read Black Panther comics, I always imagine that it's this voice speaking. Big props to James C. Mathis III for his voice work with this character. This show sold me on just how much of a badass this character actually was. He spent the first few episodes observing the Avengers to see how they fight and handle situations. He saves Captain America's life from Zemo. And then in his first major episode, Panther's Quest, he takes on all the Avengers present at the mansion and gives all of them a decent run for their money, only to ask them for help immediately afterwards. Bro, this man was bold as fuck. He was one of my favorite characters on the show, and of course I wanted to see this man in a movie with all these things coming out at the time. Though the show just released 2 years before the first Avengers film, so most of these characters were only starting to get their spot in the limelight at the time, let alone Black Panther. This was all when I was in middle school. Fast forward a few years later to 2018, and I'm a young, get it, sophomore at Morehouse College, an all-male historically black college in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, what does my alma mater have to do with the Leaping Cat Man? I'm glad you asked, because that's where my actual theater-going experience comes into play. Morehouse sits in a part of Atlanta called the Atlanta University Center, or Atlanta University Consortium, or just AUC for short. The AUC holds us, an all-women's school, Spelman College, and 2 co-ed schools, Clark Atlanta University and Morris Brown College. All of our schools have a lot of famous alumni, but I'm only going to name 3 big ones from Morehouse because you can use Google and... Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Spike Lee, and Samuel L. Jackson all matriculated through Mother Morehouse at a certain point. HBCUs continue to have a strong influence in the black community and all over the US due to their history and the people these institutions push out, and no AUC school is an exception in that regard. As a result, we had a lot of special events happen on our campuses, or we got invited to a lot of special events because of our schools. Special events that were often early screenings of movies. Black Panther had a screening on Wednesday, February 7th, which was a week before the film release, at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia. I ended up going a few hours earlier than my friends to wait in line because I wanted to make sure we got decent seats. This ended up being pointless though because I had no idea just how big the Fox Theater actually was on the inside. This special screening was open to us, the citizens of Atlanta, and even people who were part of the crew for the film, since a lot of it was filmed in Georgia. So the waiting line was huge. Luckily, the wait itself was pretty fun since a lot of my peers from school were there, and we were all hyped for this movie. You could tell people in line were annoyed as hell with us, but we didn't care for the most part. There were also some celebs too. Our student section in the seats even gave Kim Fields a round of applause. Yes, Ray Jean from Living Single walked by us, and we applauded her for her outfit, like anytime we saw how someone was dressed for the premiere. Our phones also got sealed at the entrance so no one could film anything. Before the movie started though, they drop a major bomb on us and have Samuel L. Jackson come out on stage. Nick Fury himself was there to grace us with his presence.
This film is the ultimate black superhero movie.
And he even shouted out the AUC. Damn, I don't say this phrase a lot, but this deadass had to be one of the blackest days of my life. I would have wanted him to just stay up there and talk to us all night if we weren't there to watch the movie. But alas, we had to watch the movie. Later on, after the movie, Senator John Lewis, may he rest in peace, showed up because why not at that point? The only thing that would have made this even blacker, if such a thing even exists, would be if someone was DJing and if there was an old black dad grilling food somewhere for everyone. Overall, this was easily my favorite theater going experience ever. I was hype alone from just the fact that the movie was coming out, but here I was getting to see the film a week in advance and with a bunch of people all excited to see the film for different reasons, and I got to see it with some of my closest friends. And even celebrities are geeking out over this. I bring all this up to let you guys know more about where I'm coming from in this video, as well as illustrating more why this film is such a huge deal for us. It's not often that we see a major blockbuster center around black people in an Afrofuturistic setting. Hell, we don't see black superheroes getting this big of a spotlight often at all. Big props to Blade for starting all this. Now, of course, someone watching this is probably thinking, why is it such a big deal to have a black superhero? And to that I'd say, take a closer look at how black people are usually portrayed in media. Our representation quite literally started with our ridicule and was used as a means to justify violence towards us. Of course, that representation evolved over the years, but that means of ridicule and diminishing our presence in stories continued. Nowadays, we're mostly relegated to being side characters who end up having nothing to do and or just get killed off. Of course, we're gonna lose our shit when the first mainstream black superhero ends up getting a big budget Hollywood movie. Even if Black Panther as a film didn't live up to its hype, and best believe I have my criticisms of this film, it at least showed that we could have grand epic stories that were about us and came from us. And I mean the movie, not the character as a whole. Rest in peace Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, cause then that leaves room for something that's even better than Black Panther to come out in the future. Afrofuturism has a place in the future of storytelling, and that's honestly enough for me and a lot of us. All that being said though, how does Black Panther hold up as a film after all this time? You guys probably already know the plot of the movie, so I'm only going to give you my best Sparknotes type summary before going into my criticisms. Black Panther takes place a week after the events of Captain America Civil War, hence why T'Challa has to go through the coronation process. So funny enough, this film actually takes place in 2016. This man's facial hair changed a lot in just a week. After becoming king, he has to deal with an old enemy of his father's, Ulysses Klaue, who turns out to be a red herring for the film's true antagonist, N'Jadaka, or his more popular name, Eric Killmonger. Killmonger bum rushes the throne of Wakanda after he beats T'Challa in ritual combat. Now that he's on the throne, he plans to arm black people all over the world to start the revolution. Then here comes T'Challa and friends to stop him from causing any more damage with vibranium. Once Killmonger is defeated, T'Challa then decides to gentrify Oakland.
I bought this building, and that building, and that one over there.
To form a new community outreach center before officially opening Wakanda's doors to outsiders. That's the film in a nutshell. For me, I never let my hype blind me to the flaws of this film. In hindsight, if I were to rate it based on a typical number score, it'd probably be a 5 or 6 out of 10, leaning on 5. Yeah, it's an average superhero film. Like I said, I watched a lot of these in the first place, so for me, this movie doesn't really stand out that much in that regard. If you think I'm full of shit and that this film is even better or worse than that, then by all means, feel free to disagree with me. Despite this though, Black Panther is still a really enjoyable film to watch, and one I still watch from time to time. While this film is still very much an MCU film at its core, one thing I appreciated for it was that it had a more balanced tone and didn't rely so much on its sense of humor to carry it like other Marvel flicks before it did. It's for the best that they handled this film with more care in that regard, considering that it does delve into more serious subject matter when it comes to Killmonger's character and more of the themes that delve into real life issues of racism and colonialism. Killmonger would have been way less effective as a villain if they tried to undercut his serious moments with a dumb quip or some unneeded slapstick humor. Some people might say that the "Hey Auntie" scene may count as unneeded humor, but I disagree. That line works because of the reveal of Killmonger's character to everyone in the throne room, and he says it to taunt Ramona, which fits his role as an antagonist and the overall vibe of his character. However, none of this can be said about the film's other villain, Gollum, but I'll get to him later. Let's talk about the main cast real quick. Despite not being as badass as he was in Civil War, T'Challa was pretty dope in this movie, in my opinion. Chadwick Boseman is great in the role. He manages to portray T'Challa's ferocity as a warrior, but he also gets the emotional beats of the character down pretty well. I think this film does a really nice job with him writing as a foil for Killmonger. T'Challa basically switched roles from his first appearance in the MCU. He was hellbent on avenging his father's death, thinking that it was Bucky's fault. Now, in this movie, he has to fight his long-lost cousin who wants Wakanda to pay for his father's death. T'Challa has to learn to literally correct the mistakes of his father's past, as he now has to deal with the consequences of that past. But of course, no one felt those consequences more than Killmonger himself. There are also the obvious civil rights leader comparisons you can make, T'Challa being the more peaceful Dr. King type, while Killmonger is more like a Malcolm X type and prefers violent retaliation over peaceful subjugation. Killmonger is only trying to achieve a dream of his father's and firmly believes in achieving it by any means necessary. He's only responding to what the world has thrown at him his whole life. T'Challa wants to set a good example as king. With the recent loss of his father weighing on him, he's struggling to not only try and live up to that example, but eventually he has to be better than who his father was. He can't afford to be the type of king that leaves behind his family or leaves behind the rest of the world with powerful resources at his disposal. Going more in depth with Killmonger, I like the character overall. His concept alone does a lot for the story. Originally, Killmonger wasn't related to T'Challa in the comics, but he was a Wakandan who was kicked out of the country alongside his traitorous father. And when he came back, you know what happened. Killmonger being rewritten as his cousin established an interesting connection between the two characters, and it adds more to the severity of T'Chaka killing his brother in Jobu. I also like Michael B. Jordan's performance, even if it is pretty one note in terms of personality for the most part. Killmonger also doesn't have flowery villain talk like a lot of antagonists have.
You're not telling me that's vibranium too, huh?
No, I'm just feeling it.
And that makes sense considering that he just grew up in Oakland and later became super educated. He honestly just talks like a random dude off the street, and that's another thing that just works about his character compared to other antagonists. He very much feels like he could be any one of us at a lot of different points in the film, which is probably what they were going for with his character, and I think it works for the most part. The angle they take with his character being more pro-black is also something that is pretty unique to this version of the character, at least from my knowledge of it. I think this angle works for the most part for this iteration of the character, especially since all the ingredients are there in the original version of the character anyway. However, there are some things that I do personally think fell flat for his character in terms of backstory. It's perfectly understandable why he'd want to take over Wakanda. His motivations in that regard are pretty strong. However, I think one of the things that makes Killmonger appeal more to people are the anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-bourgeoisie, and anti-coon sentiments in his dialogue. He tends to just say what a lot of black people and people with more left-leaning sentiments think and feel, and still say a lot because free speech. The problem comes when the sentiments in this dialogue then become the main motivation behind this big final plan. I don't think the film shows us enough to really solidify why he'd want to immediately go on to doing this, especially when he has the nation that took everything from him in the palm of his hand. Now, of course, I know why Killmonger is actually motivated by this plan. Who doesn't know why with everything we've gone through in this country? But let me ask you guys this question real quick. To all the black people watching this vid specifically, did you understand Killmonger's motivation because of his experience in the film, or did you understand it because of your life experience and your prior knowledge? Really think about that for a minute. It feels like they wrote his dialogue and backstory in a way that would just expect us to fill in the gaps for what he's saying in this regard. It just leaves more to be desired in terms of motivation for me. What works so well about his motivation to take over Wakanda is that we see the previous interaction between T'Chaka and Jobu, but we don't really see much of Killmonger's previous life beyond that. They just explain the rest of his backstory and dialogue from the other characters. I would have wanted to see more what fuels this motivation for Killmonger and why he believes using vibranium for this specific plan of his is the best course of action. It could be argued that the previous pro-black sentiments that Njobu shared showed that this part of his character is inspired by his father, and the problem here though is that it's still relegated to just dialogue, and those are his father's words and experience, not Killmonger's. Now I know what y'all are thinking. You don't want to see a villain's entire life story from birth to that point in a superhero film, and I feel that way too, which is why I thought of an idea for a flashback scene that could fix a lot of this in one go. How Killmonger got his first scars.
Each one is for a kill.
Imagine a teenage Killmonger hanging out somewhere in Oakland, minding his own business, running an errand or something. This part could be used to show how he got by without his father exactly, because seriously, I would have liked to see that. Maybe he's living with his maternal grandmother and he's off running an errand for her or something. While he's out, he gets approached by 2 police officers that pull up on him in their car when it's just the 3 of them. They start questioning Eric, asking him where he's been, what he's been doing, and mention that a robbery or something happened nearby. Eric, of course, is innocent and affirms that, but they're not convinced. The cops act super aggressive and threaten him, but Eric still refuses to go with them. They then try to take Eric by force, which leads to some kind of scuffle that ends with Eric somehow getting one of their guns and shooting both of them. Eric then runs back home with the gun and goes to the bathroom to try and calm himself down. He's standing in front of the mirror looking at himself. He thought he'd be more fazed by this, but he realizes that he actually took some kind of joy in killing these officers. Enjoying being able to take his anger out on people that he felt deserved it. But he also feels immense rage for what he has to endure, and for being unable to take that anger out on who he truly wants to kill. Eric then takes the knife and marks those first 2 scars on his wrist, or wherever. This could even be a flashback scene that could come in around his coronation scene where he's visited by Njobu, which is already one of the best scenes in the movie anyway. I think this would help to show how and why Killmonger ended up on this path of violence, and it also leaves you to fill in the gaps about his backstory, but not in a way that purely relies on his dialogue. With this, people would be left thinking things like, who do the scars on his body represent? How many people has he killed? I know most of them came from his time in the military, but having a few kills before that I think would help to affirm everything we saw about Killmonger in the film. And the flashback doesn't even have to occur exactly how I describe it either. I imagine there could be a different one that takes place with him during the military, or any other example that could be pulled from Killmonger's past. Of course, you'd have to explain how he'd be able to get away with killing police officers, but is that really the most far-fetched thing in the world they live in? Especially in a world that already has an alternate take on history? I'm sure it's possible to find some way to do it. I also wouldn't be opposed to reading a graphic novel series about Killmonger's life before we saw him. This also helps to draw a more direct parallel to what African Americans go through, and would help to make Killmonger's experience feel more real in that regard. While I have a lot to say about Killmonger, I still want to affirm that I like his character and his role in the film. And like I said before, this man isn't trying to be funny like some of the other Marvel villains, which got really annoying in the past few movies. The same can't be said about the film's other villain though, Ulysses Klaue. Andy Serkis is an incredible actor, but damn, he goes so over the top mustache twirling villainous that I can never take him seriously watching this. Admittedly, he is pretty fun to watch at some points, he's clearly enjoying this, and he does have a cool gimmick with the literal hand cannon, but for the most part, he was just doing way too much. It becomes all too noticeable during the interrogation scene. It's like they pulled this dude out of a whole other Marvel movie, and they kinda did. What makes this even worse in hindsight is how big of a villain Klaue is in Black Panther's history. It was originally him who killed T'Chaka, and T'Challa had to get revenge on him with help from the Fantastic Four. I feel like this character overall was just a really missed opportunity with this film.
That is for my father.
Even if Killmonger killing him does work for his character, they should have made him more like the external colonizer type threat that he usually is. But instead, we got this.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me.
As for the rest of the side characters, I think they're good for the most part. My personal favorite being the Dora Milaje commander Okoye. Denai Gurira kills it. She and Shuri have a really nice chemistry with T'Challa that makes their scenes fun to watch. Speaking of Shuri, I like her character as well. I remember one of my friends mentioning that she likes the fact that the humor between her and T'Challa was nice to see, considering that it doesn't rely on them being loud, obnoxious, or mean-spirited to each other. I like the dynamic of Shuri being this techno genius who is super knowledgeable of vibranium too. It makes sense that she naturally know about it considering she's a Wakandan princess, and it also helps to create a nice partnership dynamic between her and T'Challa, with her helping him with the tech he uses in battle. Nakia is alright to me. I like Lupita Nyong'o's performance, and I do like her character here, but I can't help but think that her role in this movie isn't as crucial as the film wants her to be. Did we really need her to affirm that Wakanda needed to use its resources to benefit the world if the film's main antagonist would later come in to really affirm that? Could Shuri not have snuck in the cave and stolen a heart-shaped herb for M'Baku M'Baku in her place. Of course, she did help get them into the casino at the beginning, but is that really something T'Challa and Okoye couldn't have figured out themselves? Angela Bassett also doesn't have much to do in this film either, which is a shame considering that it's Angela Bassett. I feel like there should have been more scenes with her and T'Challa exploring their mother-son dynamic. Like instead of Nakia finding him on the cliffside and talking to him after finding out about Njobu's murder, maybe it's Ramonda who has that conversation with him instead. It would make sense for her to take up a more prominent mentor role as he's now in his father's place as king. This film could have explored this dynamic more too, considering that Ramonda is actually T'Challa's stepmother in the comics. His birth mother and Yami died a week after he was born. I don't know if that's different in this iteration, and the film doesn't really make a point about that. It could just be implying that Ramonda is his birth mother in this version, but I'm not entirely certain. I still felt the need to bring this up though. Either way, this relationship should have been explored more in this film. An unexpected surprise to me in this was M'Baku. His character just brings a lot of energy to the scenes that makes him really fun to watch. It's also probably for the best that they didn't borrow everything from his comic counterpart too. Just imagine how livid people would be if they actually had this dude going by Manape in the film. W'Kabi is also a cool character, for the most part. I feel like the film should have had him struggle more with his decision to turn on T'Challa during Killmonger's takeover. It would have helped to make his character more compelling. His motivations are there too, considering Klaue killed his family and got away with it for years. The fact that there's a whole deleted scene where he and Okoye argue over Killmonger's rule just proves my point.
30 years there's been no justice, and T'Challa swore to bring him back. Not take him to the UN, not take him to the CIA, but bring him here to us. Like a real king.
Seriously, why was this taken out of the final cut? This is a good scene. Bilbo Baggins was pretty cool in this movie too. That's all I really have to say about him. And of course, with superhero movies, you got the fight scenes and all the comic bookiness that I love out of these movies. For the most part, Black Panther delivers in that aspect in my opinion. The Conceal fight is badass, and it's just awesome seeing all these characters throw down on what feels like a super spy fight. It almost feels like the type of scene you'd see out of a heist film or something. The scene has a nice build-up of tension that escalates upon Klaue's arrival. Then Okoye kicks everything off with this. Perfection. Now everyone's throwing hands. Then there's the whole car chase with the holotech. This is a pretty exciting part of the movie too. Okoye pulls off some more badass shit, although I always wonder how they survived Klaue's hand cannon blasting their car. I also really like the waterfall fights. The setting helps to make them stand out from the other fights in the film, and fights always look better choreographed over CGI. I don't know what it is, but these scenes somehow are really engaging to me. And of course, these scenes gave us this gem with M'Baku's intro.
M'Baku, what are you doing here? It's challenge day. We have watched and listened from the mountains. We have watched with disgust as your technological advancements have been overseen by a child who scoffs at tradition.
I don't care what anyone says, I love this scene. It was way too hype for me not to enjoy it. Even though picking a king by way of combat is a really archaic way of running your country, let alone one with one of the world's most valuable resources and super advanced technology, Wakanda maintains this method of picking rulers because of their isolation and it being a huge part of their tradition to make sure that their rulers are fit to lead. But it's honestly just kind of stupid to maintain this type of government when you have the world's most powerful resource at your disposal. Like, you're seriously gonna let a dude have control of your whole mine of vibranium and run your country just because he want to fight? It'd be like the president of the United States being decided by a wrestling match. Granted, this is something that has been a staple in the comics as well, but I still think my point kind of stands, especially considering that T'Challa himself criticizes Wakanda for this blind loyalty to tradition in the Avengers episode Panther's Quest.
This is the man who has brought catastrophe to our land. The one who took your king through cowardice and dishonor. The old ways allowed Manape to do this, and the old ways must change.
One personal problem that I do have with these fights though is that they kind of make T'Challa look weak. This movie had people thinking T'Challa was weak when this man was able to fight off the world's deadliest assassin just a week before this movie even happened. As much as I like the waterfall fights, why does T'Challa get beaten so badly here in both fights? I know we need some tension, but that's when you're supposed to make your antagonist more capable rather than your protagonist less capable. And the whole "they took his power away" excuse does not work. If film T'Challa is anything like comic T'Challa, then he would have had to go through years of intense training just to take up the throne. He obviously had that training if he was capable of beating up the Winter Soldier in the last movie. That training plus him having the Panther's power made that possible. If power alone decided fights, then Spider-Man would have beaten Captain America at the airport. Of course, I realized he had to lose to make his dramatic comeback in the end. T'Challa also did have Killmonger beaten briefly, he just chose not to finish him off. Plus you have T'Challa finding out about his father's crime right before this fight, so he's also not in the best state of mind either probably. But I still just can't help but feel like T'Challa just got pushed around a little too much in these fights for the badass that he typically is. One thing that would have worked better in this regard would be if they wrote it to where Killmonger was a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent trained by Nick Fury. That way it could be a little bit more believable that Killmonger would be able to beat T'Challa as well. You also have an excuse to throw Nick Fury in the movie because Sam Jack did say he wanted to be in this movie, and this is my way of suggesting how that could have happened. Nick Fury's presence could also be used to delve more into Killmonger's military past. As for the final fight, I like the bits when it's just all the Wakandan citizens going at it. However, I don't like the CGI fight between him and Killmonger. There's barely any real impact to their punches because of how their suits work and because of how the CGI looks, and it just looks bad. It's just two invincible dudes punching each other until they explode, and that's not fun to watch. Their first fight was way more engaging than this, and in all honesty, this final fight is mostly carried by the conflict between the citizens outside, and that makes sense considering that their nation is on the line here. So it's really cool to see them incorporated into this final conflict for their home. This final interaction between Okoye and W'Kabi in the middle fight is also great, and then we have Killmonger's final moments, which in all honesty speaks for itself.
Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
I also think that the scene with N'Jobu and T'Chaka should not have started the movie, mainly because they don't show us how it actually ends until the middle of the film when Zuri retells the story to T'Challa. It just leaves me thinking that they should have just relegated the whole thing to Zuri's anecdote. I get that they were using the moment to build a little bit more suspense in the film, but I honestly think it just comes off more as an awkward cliffhanger considering that both characters are dead in the main plot. Vibranium also feels like it's too much like a MacGuffin at some points in time. Like, how the hell does it stabilize bullet wounds? How did Shuri even heal Ross's gunshot wound? You're telling me she can perform a serious medical operation and oversees the technological development of Wakanda? I wouldn't be questioning this if they went a little bit more in depth about all this, but I just don't think that Vibranium is explored as much as it should be. Like, actually explain the two different types of Vibranium. Yes, there's two types of Vibranium. There's the usual Wakandan Vibranium, the version that we're most familiar with that absorbs kinetic energy and becomes more durable as a result. In some instances, Vibranium can straight up break if it has absorbed too much of it. The second type is the Antarctic Vibranium that breaks down metals. Misty Knight's arm is made of the second type, and it's even allowed her to break down adamantium before. You would know absolutely none of this if you just watched the movie. Is there even anti-metal Vibranium in the Marvel Universe? Vibranium can also enhance magic and is also the reason for the heart-shaped herb's powers in some instances. So many missed opportunities with the world building, man. I also would have wanted to spend more time in Wakanda, see more of how exactly Vibranium has impacted them, like showing what technologies are unique to them, what else the metal is capable of, examining more of how the different tribes function as well as looking at their history. For instance, all Wakandans are given these Komodo beads from birth. It connects them to a Vibranium-based supercomputer network that allows them to have their own internet system. Komodo connectivity allows Wakandans to access universal services like their healthcare, entertainment, telecommunications, etc. All citizens are even notified if there's a national emergency, and this allows them to access more warriors quickly in the event that Wakanda is in trouble. The Komodo beads basically allow them a great deal of communication, and it sucks that they didn't explain these more in the context of the film. Of course, they could be saving this for a sequel. Don't know about how soon that's happening with Ms. Rona out and about, so I'll just choose to make this point here. Overall though, Black Panther is a very enjoyable superhero film, and honestly, as long as it managed to just be that, then the film did its job. In hindsight, Black Panther shaped a lot of my college experiences. The Wakanda Forever salute became a staple in handshakes with so many of my peers. Everybody was playing the soundtrack, and honestly, just the positive energy people were exuding from the hype and just from having the movie out, watching it, all that was just super contagious. I think if anything, the most important thing about this film legacy will be the works that it inspires. I just wanted to make this video to point out all this and to try my best to analyze this film for what it is rather than blindly praising it or hating it. And nothing is wrong with either of those because films are subjective. subjective, everybody's got their own opinions, and blah blah blah, you get the gist. Now to wait for Black Panther 2 on May 6, 2022. That's all I have for this video. Did you agree with my points? Or do you guys think I'm full of it? Do you think there are some things I neglected to talk about? Is there anything you think I can improve on overall? Feel free to share whatever you feel in the comment section below. My name is Tassan Young, and I'm out. Be easy out there. Thank you for watching all the way through. I was putting off the re-upload for way too long. I figured now would be the best time. I'm hoping the sequel lives up to the hype, but we'll just have to wait and see, because y'all know how I feel about Phase 4. Until then though, be easy nerds.